our news, we have two stories that seem very different on the surface, but have really captured my attention today that I want to flag for you as we start off a new week. And these stories allow us to go a little deeper than the initial headlines that we would read or just see come across our screen. So we're going to use them not to compare and contrast, but to add perspective to the news cycle. So we're going to start first in Africa. I know this is a big story that many of you have paid closest attention to. It's the kidnapping of more than 300 schoolgirls in Nigeria. And there's a couple things you should know about this story. One being that hundreds of school children have been kidnapped over the last several weeks in Nigeria. This has become a common event. And one analyst that we quoted on our website talked about it being a big industry in Nigeria for a few different reasons. It is very difficult to seek a formal education in Nigeria. Less than half of all kids are in school. And that's partly because of geography, tradition, culture. It also is because there's a large, growing number of Islamic terrorist groups in the area, as well in Western Africa that Nigeria confronts on a regular basis. So you have a couple different variables here in Nigeria that have really become a factor from kids getting an education. Who took these 300 schoolgirls? We don't know. We don't know the one group that is taking responsibility. By the time you see this video, maybe we do, but at this time we do not know. Why do they take school children? Why do abductions happen? Because of ransom. And I want to mention this. BBC is a journalist based in Nigeria, and one of the things that she said is the international attention on these kidnappings has also raised the profile of them to have these kidnappers demand higher ransom. And so we want to be aware and talk about these stories. And at the same time, she also wants us to be aware of a perpetuating cycle in them. So this is a story you should know. Nigeria is a critical country in the continent of Africa. It's a young, growing population, strategically important country as well because of the counterterrorism efforts that we have as well in the region. So this is a story just to be very much aware of. And there's a crossover. So what are we fundamentally talking about in Nigeria when we're talking about school children abductions? We're talking about the security of kids in school, aren't we? And hasn't that been a major theme that we've also talked about in America in a much different way? So as we start off a new week, I found myself reflecting on what is the state of schooling in America when it comes to keeping our kids safe. And what are we focused on? We're not focused on kidnapping, thank goodness, but we're focused on the pandemic and keeping our children safe overall. Many different perspectives on how to do this in many different ways. But you should know, kind of overall, when we're looking at the country, we're starting to see a thawing of some of the school closures. So some of these major school districts like New York City, you have some kids attending in-class schooling. In the city of Chicago, today is the first day that some kids are back in the classroom for the very first time. Not all kids, but some. You still have a lot of school districts, though, major school districts like in California, that remain closed. One thing you should know about this is that if you're looking overall at state mandates for schools, you should know there's a handful of states that have mandated no classroom instruction. There's a handful of states that are mandating in-classroom instruction. But the vast majority of states don't have any sort of direction at all. So many of these decisions about school security for kids are being made at a local level, even a district level. And that's why we're seeing so much disparity. We know that there's some direction by the CDC on how to get kids back into classrooms and how schooling should be done under this understanding that we're all trying to keep each other safe, right? But people have different perspectives on how to do that. As I was looking through, I'm a product of public schools. I grew up in San Francisco. My mom's a public school teacher. She's taught public school for 40 years. And so many teachers have written me, and your hearts are so, you're talking about how you just want to keep your students safe, and you have a lot of different opinions on that. I know parents, we have a lot of different opinions on that as well. But I have to tell you, reading the story and getting an understanding of what's happening in Nigeria really added some perspective to what we're confronting here, trying to keep our children safe, doesn't it? Because what I realized just as I took a deep breath on these stories is when we're talking about policy overall, all the big news stories, we got to go deeper into like, what are the themes that we're actually covering? What are we actually talking about? We're actually talking about security for our kids, security for our teachers, security for all of us, right? The community overall. But one of the questions and why we're seeing so much debate is we're at this critical moment in the pandemic where we're asking ourselves, what is a choice and what is a necessity? when it comes to policy? What is a choice and what is a necessity? What is the science saying about a choice? What is the science saying about the necessity? What decisions do we really need to make here, right? So when you see, the school kids in Nigeria, some of them don't even have a choice to attend school. So it's a luxury for us to have even a debate about the choice, isn't it? Fundamentally, what we're talking about is security. I was touched by one of these stories. A father was quoted in the Wall Street Journal. His daughter was kidnapped. And, you got to think about it. Less than half of all girls attend school in Nigeria. It is a global pandemic, so it's hard enough for people to go to school in Nigeria. Then you have the backdrop of this global pandemic. You want to know what she wants to be when she grows up? She wants to be a doctor. Think about all the challenges she's facing and is continuing to face as we're doing this recording. And that's where her heart is, to be a doctor. So we want all of our kids to be safe, all of our children, all over the world. So I was just sitting with those two stories, and I thought those are two good stories to flag because there's a lot of different layers to the school conversation here in the United States. And there's a lot of differences, not only on the state level, but then the city level, the district, the county, all of that. And the way that we go to school, what our communities look like, how different they are, how many kids are actually in a classroom, really change depending on our region and where we're living. And so it's difficult to have that blanket policy, and we're seeing some of the difficulties of that. And that's why the federal government can't mandate what books your kids are necessarily reading in class, what their curriculum is, what sort of vaccination requirements are for entering public school, for example. All of that's made on a local level, a state or a local level. It's important to keep in mind. One thing I just want to point out for you, because we're talking a little bit about the pandemic, a couple headlines from around the world. New Zealand has been a shining example for many of what you do to keep your community safe. They have very, very difficult quarantine policies for travelers. And if they find one case, they go into lockdown. They're doing that in one of their major cities because they found a community case of COVID. So they're in lockdown. You have a major city in Brazil also entering into a lockdown. So, at this point last year, we were watching some lockdowns happen abroad, mainly in Europe. Remember, Europe over the last several weeks, different places have been in very tight lockdowns over the holidays and have come out of that. But I just want you to aware that some of these lockdowns are happening. We had some warnings, if you will, from health officials over the last several days here saying, hey, we were seeing a drop in cases and now we're seeing a little bit of a plateauing. I'm not suggesting that we're going back into lockdown, but as those headlines are popping up, I just want you to be aware of them. Just have them on your radar, and we'll continue to watch to see what happens next. Do you guys have any questions about anything before I let you go? I know it's Monday. I don't know about you guys, but this was a lot. It was a lot to get going this week, right? Please keep your questions coming. We'll always answer them as well in the comment section after we post the video. I add the captions after this just to make sure that you guys can read it even when you don't want to hear me, which I get, I understand. And we also have more on these stories as well on smarternews.com. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your support. And again, this is the fundamental question that I'm seeing, the theme in these news stories. When we're talking about policy, schooling, otherwise, what is a necessity and what is a choice? How do we negotiate those two? And I don't have the answer for that, is how we're going to get to that next chapter of some of these big stories that we're covering. All right, guys, have a great start to your week. More stories coming on smarternews.com. And thank you again for all your support.